to MFA Writers, the podcast where we talk to creative writing MFA students about their program, their process, and a piece they're working on. I'm your host, Jared McCormick. Today, I'm with Vanessa Chan. Vanessa is a Malaysian writer who writes about race, colonization, and women who don't toe the line. Her fiction and nonfiction have been published or are forthcoming in Electric Lit, Conjunctions, The Rumpus, Pigeonholes, and more. Vanessa is a fiction editor at Tri-Quarterly Magazine, an assistant fiction editor at Pithead Chapel, and an MFA candidate in fiction at the New School, class of 2021. This follows a 12-year career in public relations, including, most recently, as Director of Communications for Facebook in California. Her writing has received support from Tin House, Mendocino Coast Writers Conference, Aspen Words, and Disquiet International. Today, she's going to read the beginning of a short story titled Coronation, which is published in Porterhouse Review and was a finalist for their Editor's Prize, which was judged by Carmen Maria Machado.
Coronation. There were many ways she was better than me. The Malaysian suburb we grew up in was separated into 10 sections, a remnant of British colonial city planning. I grew up in Section 1, the oldest of the 10 sections, in a tiny terrace house with an orange roof and shared walls with neighbors on both sides. At night, I heard the neighbor on the left, a plump woman my mother called Lady Fatface, arguing with her taller, lankier husband, whom my mother called Sir Stringbean. On the other side was an elderly man who never said anything, but who came out every day to water the dying orchid plant in front of his house. Genevieve grew up in Section 8, one of the newest sections, in a bungalow that seemed palatial to me. She and her family didn't have to share walls with any prying neighbors, and the kids could run around her yard, enormous to my childish eyes. They even had a gardener, a bent man called Muru, who smelt like toddy and came once a week to mow the lawn. Genevieve's last name was Budville, which sounded far more Western than my own. Rumor had it, her family was descended from Portuguese settlers who had colonized Malaysia in the 1500s. At school, she refused to identify as Malay, Chinese, or Indian, one of the race boxes we were required to check. Lain, she always said, I'm different, Western. It wasn't hard to believe. Her eyes didn't slope up like ours did. They opened wide, eyelids hooding her long, curling eyelashes. If you looked at her at an angle, she resembled the white women on billboards dotting the cityscape, selling off-season designer goods to Southeast Asian buyers. Her mixed race features were the closest I'd ever seen to a white person. To me, she was perfect. Her romantic origins contrasted sharply with my own. For as long as I could remember, my mother had called me Zongzi, meaning dumpling. It was an illustrative nickname for many reasons, including my round, chubby face, with tiny facial features designed to blend in and not stand out. Eyes small, nose flat, lips thin. But more importantly, a sticky rice dumpling did play an important part in my birth, a story my mother would tell gleefully to anyone who would listen. I was 3 weeks late, and the doctor had summoned my mother into the hospital to induce me. For reasons known only to herself, my mother had eaten an entire zongzi, the density of the dumpling's glutinous rice amplified only by the fatty pork stuffing. As her contractions intensified, the doctor stuck a translucent cord down her nose to suck out all traces of the Chinese dumpling from her stomach. Little nubs of brown rice dotted with blood and mushed up fatty pork suctioned out of her nose before I could be induced. It felt like the world's longest nose blow, like all I had to do was sneeze, and out you'd come, my little dumpling, my mother would say, mussing my hair. In primary school, girls followed Genevieve everywhere, desperate for crumbs of her friendship, but for some reason she chose me. Maybe it was because I was the only one who could pronounce her name the way she liked it. She taught everyone how to create the perfect lisp, Genevieve, because she said only unrefined people use the hard J. Every day I practiced in front of the mirror, watching my tongue flit between my teeth. Maybe it was because I helped her with her school bag, returned her library books, and begged the school lunch lady for the last pisang goreng, Genevieve's favorite, just to watch her smile as she savored the gooey yellow center. Some days she'd share the snack with me. We'd sit on the table in the center of the school's canteen, gingerly licking the hot yellow sweetness so we didn't burn our tongues, pretending we were mermaid princesses perched on a rock surveying our empire at the school. My mother was always curious about our friendship. "Zonzo," she would say, "walking next to that friend of yours makes you look like one of the 7 dwarves." And while she was right about the contrast in our appearance, she didn't understand that as much as I deplored the lack of romance in my birth story and my appearance, I lacked the charisma to edit it into something better. Some days I meted out punishments to girls who dared to defy Genevieve. When Linda wore a red velvet hair scrunchie that Genevieve wanted, I demanded that she hand it over. And when Linda refused, I instructed our class that no one was to speak to her for a whole week. After just 2 days of the silent treatment, she cracked and handed over the scrunchie, plus a pair of her favorite butterfly clips for the trouble. Even then, I knew that proximity to Genevieve imbued me with a power I could not summon on my own.
That was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much thanks for being here. Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited to talk to you. And I can't recommend enough that all of our listeners go to porterhousereview.org and read the rest of Coronation. It is such a beautiful piece. I was thinking about it for days after reading it, honestly. And one of the first things I was struck by in the piece was the sense of place. Just those little details that bring the setting to life, like hearing the neighbors argue through the walls and the old man next door watering the dying orchid, or the friend's seemingly palatial bungalow with the gardener who smells like toddy. What do you think the key is to bringing a place to life on the page like that?
At least for me, I think I was born and raised in Malaysia. I lived there for 19 years. I went to public high school all the way. And, these are places and a home that is very important to me, that continues to be my home. And I think because I inhabited Malaysia, and because it's just always, no matter where I live in the world, and I've lived many places, it's always kind of at the back of my mind, little ghost, telling me, reminding me where I come from. And so I think for me, at least, being able, to hold on to those memories, I do it by writing. And that's where my sense of place comes from. It is much more difficult for me, I think, to write place when I'm a tourist. It has always been much more difficult for me to write things like, if I went to Italy on vacation, just because I think it doesn't feel like home for me. And so place for me, being able to write place, is being able to feel at home in it.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. So you mentioned like holding on to those memories. So are a lot of these details that you're including in this piece like concrete memories that you have from growing up in Malaysia, or are some of these things that you're making up on the go as you're writing?
The stories, I think my stories are generally imagined, right? The characters are not real, although when I do publish them, everyone in my family wants to know who they are and which character they are, which I think is something all writers go through. I've had to tell my mom over and over again that she's not every mother that I have ever written in every piece that I have ever published. But yes, I think, I did spend a few years in a little house with an orange roof that was incredibly hot and unromantic. I am always able to conjure up the sort of humidity of Malaysia because, that's just where I grew up and, where I call home. Yeah.
And when I was reading it, I kept thinking, like, I can not only see this place in my head, I feel like I can hear it and I can taste it and I can smell it.
I'm so glad.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, like, are you thinking about the 5 senses when you're trying to create your setting and create these scenes?
I think I don't consciously do it, but I think that's what a sense of place is, right? To be able to inhabit it by, seeing it and smelling it and being able to feel it and being, whether you're hot or you're cold, all of that, I think, is really important to me. Malaysia is a very tactile place just because of the nature of the weather. It's tropical, so it's humid, and then there'll be these massive tropical storms in the evenings that last just a few minutes. But there'll be lightning, and there are some parts of the United States that are like that too. And it's something I think anyone that has ever lived there knows well, how tactile the place is, how food is very tactile, It's very good. I think it's the best in the world, although there will, my friends in Singapore will probably argue with me. But, if you've lived in Asia, you know that we are very competitive with our food.
Yeah, I lived in Taiwan for 2 years and South Korea for 2 years. So,
excellent food. Taiwan's food is so good.
I know. I lived in Taiwan and I thought this is the best food in the whole world. And then I moved to South Korea and I thought this is the best food in the whole world.
When I was in Taiwan once, I went on my own because I just wanted to eat. It was on the way home to Malaysia, and I don't speak Mandarin well. In fact, I barely speak Mandarin. I can count 1 to 10, maybe say my name. But I got into a taxi and I was like, I need to go to the places with food, and I didn't know how to tell the taxi driver, and so I just kept going "tuh," which is Mandarin for eat. And he was like, all right. And he dropped me off at a night market. And that's basically how I communicated for the 3 days that I was in Taiwan, just yelling eat everywhere I went.
Do you ever find it difficult to write stories about Malaysia now that you're living in New York City?
Not really, because I actually think it's harder for me to write stories about New York City than it is about Malaysia. I think I set, without meaning to, everything in Malaysia. And even the stories that I don't set in Malaysia, some of my nonfiction has been, based in New York, because I am here right now. They tend to draw from memories or childhoods or things that happened in Malaysia. I don't know. I think it's unconscious. And it's also, though, more recent. When I was first starting writing, maybe over 10 years ago, and you hear this from a lot of people of color. I worked in the US. I wrote about, my office in the US. My characters were always white because I couldn't imagine, at that point, what I had been reading was only literature by white people about white people. I couldn't imagine characters that were not that way. And so that's common. And that's something that, I found evolved as I started to write more and started to understand who I was as a writer and as a person. And now, without meaning to, everything I do goes back to who I am, I think, at my core, which is no matter where I live, I will always be a Malaysian person.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, I spent several years abroad, and I feel like I have this interesting connection to you, as a writer, because I'm still to this day struck by how spending time in a new place changes your perspective of the place that you came from. I come from small, rural mid-Missouri, and I just wanted to get out and as far away as possible. So when I graduated from school, I moved to Taiwan, right? I bought a one-way ticket. And
from when you graduated from school, that's young.
I graduated with my undergraduate degree, and I moved to Taiwan, and I didn't come back to the States for about 8 years. And it was during that time abroad that suddenly that place that I found so boring came to life for me in my imagination and really inspired my writing. And suddenly I found that my characters were people from that town. And it's interesting, that, it requires almost for me, and I'm wondering if it's the same for you, to get out of that environment in order to find the inspiration to put that into your writing.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. I don't think I would have dreamed about writing about Malaysia when I was still in it. I only ever read colonial literature about faraway, far-flung places, in the great Wild West. And then I moved away and I was like, I don't know if it's that good out here in the West compared to where I'm from. But yeah, I spent 19 years going to school in Malaysia, and I was pretty bored, like I think most people, and I got a scholarship to go to Berkeley, and I was like, I'm out. I moved to Berkeley with a scholarship, $100 in my back pocket, and a bag of luggage, and I was like, never going back. And now it's been, I don't know, about the same number of years, 16 or 17 years. And I'm like, maybe it's time to go back. The United States is not looking that great right now.
Oh, that's putting it mildly, but
I'm trying to be polite for your podcast.
That's okay. You don't have to. Uh, yeah, it's interesting. I remember traveling and living abroad and thinking the last place that I ever wanted to live was back in Missouri. And now here I am. I'm in the University of Missouri in Kansas City, writing stories about this place that I grew up in because I find it fascinating now. Something about getting older and trying to come to terms with the person you've become and like the building blocks that made you who you are, I find very inspiring. And I'm wondering, even outside of your writing, like, has your view of or relationship to Malaysia changed since you've left?
My friends joke that I romanticize it a little bit too much because I've been away. They're like, it's not that great, But yeah, I think moving away from actually the people, so my family, whom I am quite close to, has been something that's changed. I think I couldn't wait to leave. I thought there was a much bigger world out there for me, and there was. I've been very lucky in the United States. I've achieved a lot of things that I don't think would have been possible for me if I had sort of stayed at home. But at the same time, I think my values and the people that I hold dear are very, very far away from me right now. And it's very difficult, especially in a pandemic. I was supposed to go home and see my grandmother this summer. And, I haven't been able to do that. And she's 91 years old. My mother passed at some point during this pandemic as well. She did live in the United States. It's a long and different story, but she's in a different state. I couldn't get to her. And so I think the distance which was always major, has been exacerbated, I think, by this pandemic. And that's probably what has changed my perspective about where I want to be and who I want to be and where I want to live as I get older, which is not something I want to think about, getting older.
Yeah. So I'm curious about that idea of distance, not just literal distance between 2 points, but also distance between like the parts of ourselves and our identities. You talk about having that kind of dual identity of being proudly Malaysian, but spending a lot of time in the States at this point, and how that creates kind of this gray area when you are mixed race, or if you have a hyphenated identity, or you speak more than one language. There's this dissonance or gray area between your two identities. And I'm wondering if you would say that you understand this gray area and therefore you write about it, or whether you are writing to try to understand that gray area in yourself. So I guess it's like a chicken or the egg question.
I think one can never really fully understand. Take that back. I think as writers, we're not writing because we understand, right? That's an academic. Maybe that's even an anthropologist. But as writers, we're people who question and people who are, frankly, to my mind, constantly lost and trying to find a way forward. And we're people who choose to lock ourselves in rooms all by ourselves and talk to ourselves all day and make people up to talk to. And that is what we choose. So no, we are not people who have it all figured out. We do not. I definitely do not. I think, though, for me personally, Malaysia is a country of gray areas, right? We had 4 colonizers before independence. There are many. It's a multiracial, multi-ethnic country. My family is half Chinese. My grandfather, on one side, arrived from a junk boat from China to escape communism. And then on the other side, we are a race called Eurasian, which is basically, my grandmother's last name is Rosario. We are descended from our Portuguese colonizers. And so, I think when we talk about being Malaysian, there is always a hyphen in there. Everybody is mixed in some way. We speak multiple languages. It's very rare for someone in Malaysia to be monolingual. We speak at least 2 languages usually. And I think that hyphenated identity becomes even more profound when I moved to the United States, right? So I became not just a Malaysian, not just a foreigner, but also had to navigate being what it meant to be Asian American and a minority in a way that maybe I wasn't back in Malaysia, but also a foreigner, also a woman in the workplace, which is very different. I was always a minority, even in my workplace. I was a person of color, a woman younger than everyone else in a male-dominated industry, which has many pitfalls. I think I write personally because it's hard to feel like I fully belong anywhere. And I'm always sort of trying to swim to find that little nook that I belong in. And I don't know if I found it yet, but I enjoy writing towards it.
It is a form of exploration, right? And I find in my stories, I often don't know what they're about when I start, and I don't want to know. I wonder if that's the same for you.
I think for me, it actually depends on the form. I was just talking to a friend about this. I think with short stories, I tend to start with the premise and then write, towards it, never really know how it ends. But I'm working on a novel right now and realize that I have to outline because otherwise I'm just writing into the void. I'll write 50,000 words into the void and then have to start over. And that seems wildly inefficient. I am try to be efficient in life, and that doesn't work quite as well. I'm not a poet, but I think the poetic form is probably a little bit freer in that way.
You mentioned the colonial history of Malaysia, and it comes up a lot in your piece. And there was one thing you told me before, which was you mentioned the things that we're forced to inherit when it comes to colonialization. And I'm curious, if you could tell us what that means to you.
I was much more profound when I wrote that than I am right now. The things we are forced to inherit sounds like a really excellent title for something. I think the dominant narrative that colonizers have, white colonizers in places like Asia, is that they made what they came to better, right? And I think there are still people in Malaysia who believe this, that white colonizers brought with them education, religion, and civilizing influences, and we inherited all of those things. We were forced to inherit all of those things. We were forced to understand that it is necessary to eat with a fork and knife in a certain way, that it is necessary to spend, at least for some people, Sundays going to an institution that would preach to you about what the rest of your week is going to look like. That it is necessary, to sit 40 to a classroom and learn about, migration patterns and Western history. And, all of these things are the things that I think we, as a country and as a region have been forced to learn. And I don't know what our future could have looked like if none of that had happened. I don't necessarily think it would have been worse. And so I'm just very preoccupied, I think, with these both tangible and intangible things we have been forced to take on: religion, education, the presence of Western standards of beauty, and all of those things. I don't think I have a solve or an answer for them. I'm a writer. We discuss this. We can't solve anything. We just sort of write it out, hope for the best. But yeah, I am very preoccupied with those thoughts always, and I find myself writing towards them all the time.
Well, when I was reading Coronation, I was thinking that I think people think of colonization in terms like it's finished, but when I was reading, I kept thinking it's like an ongoing thing, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I think I came to the States sort of looking for something different, right? For larger opportunities and a bigger world. I was like, I'm staying forever. I'm gonna, become an American. And I don't know if it necessarily is better over here for someone who looks like me, who has the heritage that I have. So, and I don't know if it's a grass is always greener thing, right? Like I said, I've been very, very lucky here. You read my bio. I've worked and found myself in a place where I can write independently, which is amazing, which is something I never thought I would be able to do. And that is through opportunities that I have received here. Not always in the most linear way, and frankly, sometimes quite violently. I've had bad experiences in the workplace, like a lot of women. But it brought me to this place, and for some of it, I think I'm quite grateful.
Well, let's talk about that opportunity at writing at your MFA program, the New School, which is located in Manhattan. And their creative writing MFA is a 2-year program with the standard fiction, nonfiction, and poetry options, while they also have a writing for children and young adults track, which is pretty interesting. We've been talking a lot about Malaysia, of course, and I noticed on the front page of the New School website, they describe themselves as a community of diverse writers. In my experience, universities tend to throw around the word diverse, whether it's true or not. So I'd like to hear from you. Do you think the program lives up to that description?
I think it is doing much better. I think there are increasingly more diverse faculty. I've had the opportunity to work with both Mira Jacob and Alexandra Kleeman, who are both women of color and who are both really, really excellent. Our cohort is reasonably diverse. I wouldn't say that. I think there are always ways we can do better. I do think that there is a little bit more diversity at the New School because it is a larger program, which is one of the things I think that I was a little concerned about going in. The fiction cohort is about 50 people, which is much larger, I think, than most MFA programs that have 5 to 10 people. And I was concerned that would mean, less individualized attention, that it was some sort of money grab, but I found that not to be true. There are more teachers, there are more students, and as a result, I think more of us, there is, by that token, more diversity than I had anticipated. Can the program do better? Yes. Can the program fund better? Absolutely. But I think I am a big champion of the New School. I just love it over there, and it's a really excellent program. And my writing has gained a lot from there, and I have gained, I think, colleagues that will be a part of my writing community probably for as long as I write.
So when you say the fiction cohort is 50 people, do you mean across both years, or in 1 year they have 50 incoming fiction writers? Wow. It's a large cohort. It's not as large as some other programs in New York, which cost 3 times the amount, and I won't name them. But it is a pretty large cohort. I think it's maybe 40, something like that. It's pretty large. The nonfiction, poetry, and writing for children and young adults is a little bit smaller. I think it's a little bit more 12 people, 15 people, 20 people per year sort of numbers. But it hasn't felt, I think, overly large just because our workshops are the same size. My workshop is 10 people, or was 10 people. Well, I wanted to ask about the faculty. I mean, it's an accomplished faculty of active writers, and I was curious if they do a good job of balancing their own careers with teaching and mentoring the students at the New School. And now I want to know even more, because if there's 100 fiction writers in the program at any one time, that seems like a lot to manage. How are they doing?
I've had only good experiences. I think, I feel like my current thesis advisor is Mira Jacob, and she is really great at making time for me. I do think there is a sense that's just true. I think of school in general, life in general, New York programs in particular, that you do, in a way, have to reach for the things that you want. And So if you want mentorship or if you want time with someone, you do have to ask for it sometimes. And it is a little bit more challenging, I think, for someone who chooses perhaps to sit back and wait for things to come their way. I am someone who rushes in the door to take and ask for what I want. So I don't really have an issue with that as much, but I do think that is something to think about. I think when people are applying for programs that can be true of a larger program, and definitely true, I think, of a program based in New York. But as it relates to your earlier question, how are the faculty doing? I had wonderful experiences, and people are so generous. They're always ready to recommend things, to recommend us for things, to make sure we feel involved, not just in school, but in the New York writing community, which is its own, community that can be difficult to enter if you don't know anyone. And people are always very ready with introductions, and it's been great.
That's great. And speaking, we were talking about diversity in the program. I think a lot of applicants have this fear that they'll end up in a situation where no one else in the program really understands their experience or what they're trying to do with their writing. Have you found that you've been able to connect with writers who are producing art that's in conversation with your own?
Absolutely. I think I met one of those writers the first day, and we continue to share work in a big way. It's funny because that writer and I have never been in the same workshop, but we always we said work to each other very, very often. Any new piece of each of ours we share before we share with anyone else. So yes, I think that your question was, have I been able to find community at the new school? And the answer is absolutely yes. I think we are very, very close and very, very supportive of each other. There's a joke that if one person from the new school is reading somewhere or has an event, especially now in the era of Zoom, the entire new school fiction cohort will show up and start lighting up the chat in a way that is perhaps a little bit obnoxious, but also just kind of lovely and cheerful and excitable. So we are very supportive of each other in that way. And I think that sort of community and that sort of encouragement, it's obviously we built it, but I think it is also, testament to our faculty, right? And the program that they've built that has enabled us to become this close. I think it is unusual to be so close and to like your program so much. It's rare.
Yeah, if you just went by Twitter, you would think that everyone hates their MFA programs, but we're not looking for MFA candidates who are just going to say nice things about their program, but a lot of them do.
And, this not to say that, I think every program, every classroom environment will have something annoying, right? There will be a know-it-all man. There will be, someone who is unable to take feedback. There will be someone who's just unpleasant. But I think as overall, I think I have enjoyed and continue to enjoy my program very much. And as a woman of color, and frankly, as someone in her 30s, I was a little concerned going into a program which did have a reputation for being young, that I would be just ancient. I would have nothing in common with my peers, but I have found that not to be true as well. My program has people from all ages and all walks of life. In my program, we have a doctor, a physician, a tuberculosis physician. We have someone who works in magazine publishing. We have someone else I mentioned earlier who works at Pan America. We have people just out of undergrad. We have people from Malaysia, from the Middle East, and it's just been interesting getting to know everyone. Another thing I think about the new school that people should know is that a fair number of people at the new school work full time. The program is designed, all the classes are in the evening, so the program is designed to allow people with non-student lives to maintain their non-student lives, because it is difficult to live in New York without a full-time job.
Well, I think that segues pretty well into talking a little bit about funding. The website says that 93% of MFA students are awarded merit-based institutional funding. I'm not sure all applicants will know what that means. So I'm curious to hear from you. What does the funding look like at the new school? Are students getting tuition remission and a stipend? What's your experience been on that front?
So the program, and one of the things program can improve, I think, is not fully funded. Students receive pretty significant remissions or rebates, so to speak. And we receive scholarships, but I think all of us pays a little bit of tuition, and it depends, it ranges. The funding has improved. So in my admittedly anecdotal experience, I think the funding has improved from year to year. And we, my year received significantly more funding than the year before, and the year after me, I think, has a larger funding packages than we do. But it is not a fully funded program, and that is, I think, important for people to understand, because living in New York is not easy. It's not easy when you have to pay tuition and live in New York. I think, which is why there is flexibility for people to work. I do think that, unfortunately, it is true that most of the New York programs are not fully funded. And I don't know why that is, but it is the truth.
Yeah, it's interesting. It tends to be coastal schools that are not fully funded. Most of the New York schools are not fully funded. And in my experience, most of the schools on the West Coast aren't funded either. So, and I don't know why that is either. It's an interesting phenomenon. But you mentioned that a lot of students who are funded still have to pay some tuition. So do any students receive stipends to attend the new school in addition to tuition remission?
Nope. So you get tuition remission. There's usually a little bit of you still have to pay a little bit of tuition, and then you have to pay away to live in New York, which is something challenging. For me, I worked a job before that enabled me to be in a position where I can afford to live in New York, which I think is difficult. There are others who, most of my friends work full time or have some version of a student loan.
Yeah. Well, the flip side is you get to live in New York, which is
great, except unless you're in a pandemic.
Yeah, of course. Pre-pandemic, though, I guess New York is considered kind of the writing capital of the world, really. And the new school campus is right there in Greenwich Village. Which is historically a hub of creativity. So have you found that living and studying in New York has opened up opportunities for you outside of the classroom? Absolutely.
I think there are opportunities to sort of attend conferences here and meet people, meet agents, meet people in publishing that, that would not have been true elsewhere. I spent some time working at One Story, the literary magazine One Story, which is an opportunity I think pre-pandemic would not have been open to me if I wasn't in New York. A lot of my network right now are either alums, the new school, or other MFA programs in New York. And I think, there is a great opportunity to meet people if you, pre-pandemic, if you choose to. Even now in a pandemic, I think there are a lot of online events that we can go to, though, of course, that is much more democratic now, and more people can attend them because they're online and you don't have to be, based in New York and able to go to Greenlight Books for your favorite author's sort of book launch, which is something that I did a ton of and met a lot of authors that way.
Well, speaking of virtual events, recently you interviewed Kevin Kwan.
I did. I did.
Like, how did that opportunity come to you?
Oh, that's years ago when Kevin was 2 books in. A friend of mine met him at a book signing and said, "Hey, you should meet my friend who wants to be a writer." And at that point, I was like, "Do I want to be a writer? I don't know." But anyway, I met Kevin. I brought him to my workplace to do a workplace interview with a small audience, and he brought his mom because it was, it's Facebook, so campus is very beautiful, and so I gave them a tour. We hung out all day together, and then sort of lost touch over the years, and I realized that he was an alum of the New School, and I was like, I'm just going to reach out, not expecting him to respond. He's on book tour right now. He's 4 bestsellers and a movie in. He's not going to remember who I am, but then I heard from his people, and then within a week, we were doing a Zoom event, and it was a fantastic event. He had fun. People had a ton of fun. Everybody had lots of great questions for him, and I'm still surprised and by how that came together. I don't really know.
That's lovely, though. I mean, I think, we've been talking a lot about community in these programs, and I do think that that community extends beyond the cohort. I've found in my experience that alumni of my program will sometimes reach out with opportunities for those of us who are in the program now, which is just, it's really kind. They don't have to do it, but they do. Mm-hmm. And those opportunities, interviewing Kevin Kwan sounds amazing. So
it was, I think, a highlight of this quarantine for me.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Facebook. I wanted to ask, you spent several years in the workforce before pursuing the MFA, working most recently as communication director at Facebook. Do you think that working for a while before attending the MFA has benefited you now as an MFA student?
Oh, absolutely. I, like most people in my early 20s, attempted to write a terrible novel. And it was terrible because I had nothing to write about. And so I was just writing about how much I hated everything. At that time, this is pre-Facebook, I really hated my job. It was a place where this is so much sexual harassment. It was a horrendous work environment. And I hated it. And I used to have to wake up 3 times a night to answer emails from across the world. I travel, internationally 3 times a week. Anyway, I hated it. Long story short. And I tried to write a novel about it, and it was terrible. And I think, it takes some time to learn yourself. It takes some time to know yourself in the world. And I don't know if that necessarily means working, but I do think it means living a little bit before going back to school. That could take the form of traveling. That could take the form of simply existing. But I think it took a long time for me to understand who I am as a human and what I want and what I care about. And I think now I'm closer to knowing what that is and therefore able to write better about it and exploring that, as opposed to, 10 years ago when I was just mad about everything. And I think, just being rageful without understanding why is probably not the best place to write from.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm thinking back about myself 10 years ago now, and I'm just seeing this nihilistic person who, I needed time to build empathy for those people who I disagree with.
And I think, look, feeling, being nihilistic and upset and angry, that I think is just a natural form of existing in the present day, right? That's just the environment that we are in. But I think being able to reason with those feelings and to dig into them is what makes us a better writer, than just sort of feeling them and just writing, I am angry, instead of knowing why or at what point this anger developed.
So what made you want to pursue an MFA?
It's a long story, but like I said, I worked I moved to this. I've always wanted to write. I was one of those kids that wrote terrible poems and presented them to my parents, who pretended to love them. And I don't know what they've done with them. They're terrible. And, then I arrived in the States, went to college, and then realized if I wanted to stay in the States, I would need a work visa. Work visas are things that you can only get if you have a sort of more typical normalized corporate job. And so that's what I did. I sort of hopped from workplace to workplace that would sponsor my visa, which left me no time to write, no time to pursue any kind of art. I just sort of did consulting. I worked Wall Street adjacent jobs in somewhat unpleasant work environments like I've talked about. And then I ended up at Facebook, and they sponsored a green card for me, which all of a sudden gave me an immense amount of flexibility that it meant I could stay in the United States without having to work at a place that would sponsor my visa. It meant that I could just be whoever I wanted to be. And so, like most Americans presented with a ton of choice, I was paralyzed by that choice for another 2 years. And then finally decided, I think I'm going to do this. I think I'm going to give myself a place to learn how to write, and the space and time to write. And I applied to a bunch of programs and got in and moved out of the Bay Area, out of Technology Central into New York, and started writing. And I have written more in the last year than I have, I think, in my whole life. So the program has been great.
I'm really happy that it has been great for you. And I'm curious, I guess, if you could just talk here at the end about any expectations you had versus your reality in the program, or any advice that you have for anyone who's considering pursuing an MFA program.
Sure. I don't think I expected to be obviously home constantly, living in New York just because of where we are in this pandemic. But it has given me time and space to write, which has been surprising. This is such an annoying cliche. My program director, Louise Jaramillo, always says it. And sitting down every day to write is something that has been helpful to me. May not be helpful to everyone, but it has been helpful to me. I don't write every day. Sometimes I just move words around I just switch a paragraph from top to bottom, or I delete all my contractions, or, I just type, "This is not working," all throughout my draft. But as long as I sit down and futz around with whatever I'm working on, I do find that after an hour, I have some new words written, or I have a new idea about structure, or I've spent more than an hour and didn't realize it. And so, I think people who, if you want to write, you have to commit to it, I think, in the same way that you do with everything else. If you want to be better at writing, you just have to do it, a lot of it. And most of it might be nonsensical. Most of it will be just you moving things around, or you just staring at the same cursor. But I think writing is not, people come with natural talent, but writing is not something that just, for me, flows out. It's something I have to commit to and sit with and be preoccupied with constantly in order to get better.
Well, I think that's wonderful advice. And I feel like I could talk to you for hours, but I guess we'll stop there. It's been wonderful having you. Thank you so much for stopping by for a bit.
Thank you so much for having me. Now I'm going to go sit with my draft and move things around.